Welcome to this deep dive. If you're joining us today, you likely already know the destination.
You definitely know Agatha Christie.
Right. You know Christie, you know the brilliant Hercule Poirot, and you probably know the ultimate resolution of the mysterious affair at Styles.
But we aren't looking at the end game today.
No, we are not. Instead, we are putting a magnifying glass on the very first chapter. Our mission for this session is to examine the masterful, intensely emotional, and frankly, deeply suspenseful first-person narration of our guide through this story.
Arthur Hastings.
Exactly, Arthur Hastings. We want to understand exactly how the architecture of dread is constructed before a single crime is even committed.
Precisely. Because when you think of the classic English country house mystery, the image that usually comes to mind is quite cozy.
Oh, absolutely.
You picture a roaring fire, china teacups, maybe a peaceful summer afternoon on a manicured lawn. But if you actually strip down the mechanics of this opening chapter, you see that Styles Court is, well, in reality, it's a psychological pressure cooker.
It really is.
We are going to explore how Christie builds this incredibly dark, foreboding atmosphere right from the opening pages. We'll examine the intensely sinister presence of the new husband, Alfred Inglethorpe,
A great character.
and dissect how Hastings' narration brilliantly constructs a creeping, suffocating premonition of approaching evil.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at the lens through which we are viewing this entire world. Arthur Hastings himself.
Right.
To understand the tension of this chapter, you really have to consider his psychological state right at the starting line. Hastings has just been invalided home from the front.
It's the middle of the First World War.
Yes. So he's seen the horrors of the trenches, and he spent months in a depressing convalescent home. He has a month of sick leave, no close family, and he is desperately seeking a sanctuary.
He just wants to rest.
Exactly.
Wow.
So when he runs into an old acquaintance, John Cavendish, and gets invited to the Cavendish family's country estate in Essex, he thinks he's found exactly that.
A safe haven.
Hastings steps off the train into this warm, still, early July day, looking out over the green, peaceful Essex countryside, and notes that he felt he had suddenly strayed into another world.
It's a beautifully executed bait and switch.
Oh, completely.
You have a narrator who is carrying the invisible weight of wartime trauma, desperate for peace and quiet. He tells John that an idle life is exactly what he wants.
Yeah.
He believes he is walking into a restorative pastoral idyll. But from a literary standpoint, what he's actually walking into is a deeply toxic, incredibly volatile ecosystem.
And the foundation of that toxicity is a rigid Edwardian financial trap, isn't it?
It really is. The matriarch, Mrs. Cavendish, who is now Mrs. Inglethorpe, is a woman in her 70s who holds absolute control over the family's purse strings.
Because her late husband left everything to her.
Right. John's father left the estate and the bulk of his income to her for her lifetime.
Which means her two grown stepsons, John and Lawrence, are completely marooned. Have you ever walked into a room of people and instantly felt the unspoken tension? Just that heavy, suffocating air. That's exactly what Hastings steps into.
Yeah, you can feel it immediately.
It's almost like a modern failure to launch situation, but with the added weight of aristocratic societal expectations. You have John, who is 45 years old, married to a fascinating woman named Mary, yet he is utterly broke and living under his stepmother's roof.
And Lawrence, the younger brother.
Right. Lawrence actually qualified as a doctor, but gave it up to live at home and write poetry. They are grown men, completely trapped.
Trapped is the perfect word. They're entirely dependent on the whims of an autocratic woman who absolutely revels in playing Lady Bountiful.
Lady Bountiful, I love that term.
It's a term used for a wealthy woman who loves to make a great public show of her charity and benevolence while simultaneously keeping her own family on a very short leash. She dictates their routines, demands absolute compliance, and controls their financial survival.
It's a profoundly humiliating dynamic for these men.
Definitely. So when Hastings arrives expecting a sanctuary, he is actually stepping into a house built on years of resentment, forced dependence, and suppressed rage. The powder keg is fully packed.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The match.
Yes, the match. Hastings arrives exactly at the moment someone has lit a match and tossed it onto that powder keg. The inciting incident that sets this entire family ablaze is dropped on Hastings before they even leave the train station.
It doesn't take long at all.
No, this 70-something matriarch has suddenly and inexplicably married a man 20 years her junior, So Hastings is getting an earful from John Cavendish right out of the gate.
John is furious.
What is it about this new husband, Alfred Inglethorpe, that has the family so openly enraged?
Well, John doesn't hold back, does he? He hasn't seen Hastings in 15 years, but the visceral hatred he has for Alfred just pours out of him. He calls Alfred a rotten little bounder and an absolute outsider.
Those are heavy words for that era.
It's very heavy. In the context of the Edwardian upper class, calling someone a bounder was a severe insult. It specifically meant a man of objectionable manners who is trying to climb the social ladder.
Someone who fundamentally doesn't know his place.
Exactly. John explains that Alfred just turned up out of nowhere, claiming to be a distant cousin of the matriarch's companion, and within 3 months, he's married the woman who controls the entire Cavendish fortune.
To John, it's barefaced, shameless fortune hunting.
Oh, absolutely.
So Jan has thoroughly primed Hastings to hate this guy. But then Hastings actually meets Alfred in person, and his physical description of the man is so bizarrely specific.
The boots.
The boots. He notes this massive, unusually thick black beard. He points out that Alfred is wearing patent leather boots out in the country, which even to a casual observer seems like a massive faux pas.
Oh, it's a huge misstep.
And he wears gold-rimmed pince-nez, those glasses that clip onto the bridge of the nose. But beyond the fashion choices, Hastings focuses on this unnatural, stage-like impassivity.
Yeah, he says Alfred has a deep, unctuous voice.
And is constantly, almost performatively, fawning over his new wife. Hastings takes an immediate, rooted dislike to him. But wait, I have to ask. Hastings just got off a train from a brutal war. Is it possible he's just hypervigilant and misreading a normal, albeit tacky, guy who doesn't understand country fashion?
That is the crucial tension of the entire chapter. What's fascinating here is how Christie uses those specific physical traits to trigger Edwardian xenophobia and class anxieties.
Interesting. So the boots mean more than just bad taste.
Exactly. The patent leather boots aren't just a bad fashion choice. They are a glaring physical symbol of an urban interloper invading a sacred, traditional rural space.
Ah, I see.
And the thick beard is described almost like a mask, something hiding his true face. Hastings isn't just reacting to bad tailoring, he's reacting to a disruption of the social order.
Right.
But to your point, Hastings explicitly notes the atmospheric shift the moment Alfred enters the scene. He says a sense of constraint and veiled hostility settles over the company.
The pleasant summer afternoon completely evaporates.
The family is forced to sit there, financially paralyzed, watching this strange interloper play the doting husband. Hastings is capturing the suffocating emotional reality of a room where everyone is suppressing violent hatred.
Suffocating is exactly right. Which brings us to the casual conversations happening around Styles Court. You'd think people would try to keep things polite, but the dialogue is absolutely dripping with dread.
The tea party.
Yes, this incredibly eerie tea party scene out on the lawn. They're sitting under a sycamore tree, having sandwiches, and the topic of conversation somehow drifts to crime.
As it naturally does on a summer afternoon.
Right. Hastings casually admits his secret ambition is to be a detective. He mentions a marvelous little fellow he met in Belgium who claimed all detective work was a mere matter of method.
A nice little nod to Poirot there.
Exactly. But the dramatic irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. He's happily chatting about solving mysteries while sitting squarely in the middle of one that's about to detonate.
It's a masterclass in normalizing the macabre within a polite setting. Every piece of dialogue in that scene is carefully calibrated to raise the hairs on the back of your neck.
And then Evie chimes in.
Evelyn Howard, who goes by Evie, the blunt, practical companion to the matriarch, she claims she wouldn't need a detective's method to spot a murderer.
Right. She says she would feel it in her fingertips.
Feel it in her fingertips if he came near me. To announce that at a polite afternoon tea is incredibly jarring.
And the conversation just keeps getting darker. Hastings suggests a murderer might be a woman, but Evie dismisses that, associating murder with violent masculine crimes. But then Mary Cavendish speaks up.
Mary is such a fascinating character.
She is. And let's remember how Hastings has already described Mary. He notes she has a slumbering fire about her, with wild, untamed, tawny eyes.
Tawny eye.
So Mary's clear voice cuts through the polite chatter, and she calmly states that murder isn't always violent. She suggests that because the medical profession is generally ignorant of uncommon poisons, there are likely countless cases of poisoning that go completely unsuspected.
Just a casual observation over tea.
It's such a dark, specific turn that Mrs. Inglethorpe literally shivers and says it makes her feel as if a goose were walking over her grave.
Notice how Christie is methodically tightening the psychological screws on the reader. Instead of just establishing a motive, she is now casually flooding the board with the means.
The means and the opportunity.
Exactly. Let's look at the incredible, almost absurd coincidences surrounding this very specific topic of poison. Mary Cavendish isn't just throwing out a random theory. She is directly quoting Dr. Bauerstein.
And who is Dr. Bauerstein?
He just happens to be a brilliant London toxicologist, one of the greatest living experts on poisons, who is conveniently resting in this tiny village after a nervous breakdown.
Yes. And right on cue, as they are discussing this, a young girl named Cynthia runs across the lawn. She's the young orphan protege of Mrs. Inglethorpe. And where does Cynthia spend her days?
At the dispensary.
She works at the Red Cross Hospital dispensary, literally handling medications and chemicals. Hastings, thinking he's just engaging in light, flirtatious banter, asks her, "How many people do you poison?"
And she laughs and says, "Oh, hundreds."
The dark humor is chilling when you realize the reality of 1916 England. Because of the war, chemicals, medicines, and lethal substances are ubiquitous. The claustrophobia really sets in when you realize almost everyone in this orbit has access to a murder weapon.
Exactly. Let's take a step back and look at the ecosystem Christie has built in just a few dozen pages. We have a wealthy matriarch whose death would instantly liberate multiple desperate people from financial ruin.
Check.
We have a hated, suspicious new husband who everyone assumes is a fortune hunter. And now, we discover that this idyllic country house is metaphorically and literally surrounded by toxins. You have a world-class poison expert lingering at the gates, a dispensary worker living under the roof, and a daughter-in-law calmly musing about the efficacy of toxic murder over tea.
The pastoral illusion Hastings was so desperate for is completely shattered.
Absolutely shattered.
Which brings us to the explosive breaking point of the chapter. If the tension was simmering during tea, it boils over completely when Evie Howard abruptly packs her bags to leave.
This is a huge moment.
Evie is such a compelling figure. She's described with heavily masculine coding for the era. She has a deep voice, wears thick boots, and speaks in this rapid-fire telegraphic style. And she has just had a massive, unforgivable fight with Mrs. Inglethorpe. Why is Evie the one to finally break the polite silence?
Well, Evie is the only one in the house willing to exercise brutal honesty because, unlike John and Lawrence, she isn't psychologically paralyzed by the inheritance.
Right, she's an employee, not an heir.
She's a paid companion, yes, but she operates with a blunt autonomy. He tells John, Mary, and Hastings exactly what went down. She called Alfred a fortune hunter right to his wife's face.
Old.
Very. She told Mrs. Inglethorpe, "There's no fool like an old fool." And she went even further, heavily implying that Alfred is carrying on an illicit affair with a pretty young local woman named Mrs. Rakes, the wife of a nearby farmer.
Mrs. Inglethorpe's reaction was exactly what you'd expect from a proud autocrat. She called Evie a wicked woman telling wicked lies and essentially banished her.
But before Evie leaves, she delivers that warning.
This unforgettable, chilling warning. She says to Mrs. Inglethorpe, "That man would as soon murder you in your bed as look at you."
Wow.
She takes the subtextual fear of the entire household and speaks it aloud. It's no longer just an unspoken tension. The threat of murder is now out in the open air.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Evie's sudden departure is catastrophic for the psychological architecture of Styles Court. Hastings explicitly analyzes this. He realizes that Evie's presence had spelled security.
She was the anchor.
She was the grounded, practical anchor of the household. She kept the weeds down, both literally in the garden and metaphorically within the family dynamic. Without her blunt, policing presence, the aristocratic politeness gives way to naked fear.
Yeah.
Before she steps into the motor car, she grabs Hastings' arm, sinks her voice to an intense whisper, and tells him the family are all sharks trying to get money out of the old woman. Her final directive to him is, "Above all, Mr. Hastings, watch that double her husband."
It's a phenomenal exit, and it leaves Hastings absolutely reeling. As a reader, you are pulled through these final suffocating moments of the chapter entirely through his heightening paranoia.
You really feel his panic.
He goes for a stroll through the woods with John Cavendish, and without Evie there as a buffer, John's aristocratic restraint just crumbles. He bitterly confesses that the estate should be his by rights, and he says out loud that he is at his wit's end for money.
That is terrifying.
Think about it. Someone just warned you that a murder might happen, and 5 minutes later, the heir to the estate casually admits he is financially desperate.
And that walk through the village becomes a sensory overload of red flags for Hastings. Everywhere he looks, the dreadful theories Evie planted are seemingly confirmed.
Yeah, they pass a gate.
They pass a gate, and a pretty young woman of a gypsy type smiles at them. John's face hardens, and he confirms to Hastings that this is Mrs. Raikes.
The very woman Evie accused Alfred of pursuing.
Exactly. Then they look over toward the house, and they see Mary Cavendish warmly greeting a tall, bearded man. John curtly identifies him as Dr. Bauerstein, the poison expert, and Cynthia chimes in that the doctor is a great friend of Mary's.
And we can't forget Lawrence. Earlier, Hastings looked at his window and saw Lawrence Cavendish stepping out from the shadow of a tree, watching Cynthia and John walking together.
With a look on his face.
Hastings specifically notes that Lawrence's face was completely mastered by some violent emotion. So everywhere Hastings turns, the pastoral illusion is tearing at the seams. He sees financial desperation, violent jealousy, rumors of illicit romance, and literal experts in deadly toxins roaming the grounds.
All of this culminates in Hastings' final, overwhelming realization. He came to the country to heal from a war, seeking an idle life. But as he stands there reflecting on Evie's departure, the air itself feels fundamentally altered.
Christie writes this beautifully.
The sinister face of Dr. Bauerstein flashes in his mind. Then the vivid, wicked smile of Mrs. Raikes, John's bitter confession of poverty, and the unnatural, masked behavior of Alfred Inglethorpe. A vague, suffocating suspicion of every single person fills his mind.
The chapter ends with his profound realization. Just for a moment, I had a premonition of approaching evil.
It gives you chills.
So what does this all mean? It means this opening chapter isn't merely an introduction to a puzzle. It is an absolute masterclass in building atmospheric dread.
From sunny garden to utter paranoia.
Yes. We started with a man stepping off a train into a sunny, peaceful Essex garden looking for refuge. And within a few dozen pages, we are completely enveloped in paranoia. And the sheer brilliance of Christie's technique is that we, as the audience, are guided entirely by Hastings' emotional responses. We feel the dread because his trauma-heightened senses feel the dread.
We hate Alfred because his social sensibilities are offended by Alfred.
Exactly.
This raises an important question, though. Something for you to deeply consider as you reflect on the mechanics of this text. We've talked extensively about how masterful Hastings' narration is at constructing this dread. But we have to ask ourselves, how reliable is Arthur Hastings as our narrator?
Oh, that's a great point.
Consider the sequence of events. Before Hastings ever laid eyes on Alfred Inglethorpe, John Cavendish was in his ear at the train station, explicitly defining the man as a bounder, a fortune hunter, and an outsider. Hastings absorbed the Cavendish family's deep, bitter financial panic before he even walked through the front doors.
He was infected with their bias from minute one.
Exactly. So how much of this approaching evil that Hastings feels is an objective, tangible reality? Is Alfred Inglethorpe truly a sinister stage villain monster plotting a gruesome murder?
Or is Hastings just projecting?
Is Hastings a man already vulnerable from wartime trauma, simply experiencing the contagious paranoia of a greedy, desperate family projecting all of their own hatred onto an outsider who doesn't conform to their class expectations?
That is wild to think about.
Are we, as the reader, being expertly manipulated by Hastings' own adopted prejudices before a single crime has even occurred? It entirely shifts how you interpret the tension in that house.
That completely reframes the entire architecture of the chapter we just discussed. If you're listening, I highly encourage you to go back to that opening text and look at the mechanics of how Hastings is perceiving these characters.
Read between the lines.
Keep questioning the motives of everyone you meet, and maybe even question the narrator himself. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, watch your teacups, and we will catch you on the next one.